Hi everyone, this is Syrian Girl. I interviewed the former UK ambassador to Syria, Peter Ford. He was ambassador from 2003 to 2006. About the upcoming Syrian army offensive against Al-Qaeda in Idlib and the possibility of a false flag chemical attack and subsequent US strikes, for which there are many signs that this is going to happen in the next few days. This is actually the first part of the interview. The second part is going to be about the Balkanization agenda against Syria, the Kurds, and the possible US withdrawal. These are snippets of that second part.
I was myself almost assassinated by a bunch of jihadis. The Kurdish rug is going to be pulled from under the Americans' feet. Trump, he wants out, but he's being resisted by what I call the permanent government of America. Everything America has done for the last 40 years, at least in the Middle East, has been because of Israel.
So please be sure to watch out for that second part. I'm going to be uploading it in the next few days. But for now, here's the first part. I hear the next army offensive is going to be in Idlib. And is it accurate for me to say that there are some Turkish special forces or soldiers there? And if so, what kind of a problem is that going to cause with Turkey or even NATO when the Syrian army rolls in?
There are 10 or is it 12 small Turkish observation posts, probably manned by Turkish special forces, around the edges of the core of Idlib. And indeed, it would be a problem if the Syrian army were to steamroller over these points. But this is what's being discussed now. It appears that there is some kind of deal for the Syrian army to be allowed to, by the Turks, to retake Jisr al-Shuhur, because that's kind of special and it's a threat to Latakia, Latakia. But for Idlib center, Idlib city, there are ongoing discussions, and I understand, breaking news. The Russians have given the Turks an ultimatum: 1 month to dissolve the jihadi armies there, kick out the foreign fighters, or we let the Syrian army walk in. And based on previous history with these things, it's option 2, which seems the more likely. So far, the Turks have not addressed this very seriously. They claim that they want Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the Al-Qaeda affiliate, for the other forces, the other jihadis, to separate from the Al-Qaeda bunch. But they're not making this happen. Maybe now they will begin. And anyway, it'll be a good thing, divide and rule, to get the jihadis fighting each other. This is not a bad strategy. But I do very much fear that it's not going to work. And, there are reasons not to delay. The Syrian army has momentum. It would be demoralizing to disperse and then have to climb up the mountain again. They're on a roll. The Idlib are terrified. The jihadis are terrified now. Their morale is low. It's in their interest to run down the clock, to delay and delay. I don't think either Russia or the Syrian government will allow this.
That's good news.
It's not good news for the people of Idlib, I'm afraid.
Of course.
Except that within a relatively short time they will be liberated. But I'm afraid it's going to be a very bloody battle. It's going to be on the scale of eastern Aleppo, I'm afraid.
Will they not be able to cross the border into Turkey temporarily?
Yes, I believe so. Whatever the Turks say about not accepting more refugees, and this is the way the Russians have to pressure the Turks. The Turks really do not want a massive influx of 1 million refugees, which could easily happen. So maybe they will be serious, the Turks. But you're right. There is an escape route, and this will mitigate some of the humanitarian consequences.
Can hope so, but of course the humanitarian consequences of Al-Qaeda's presence in Syria and ISIS's presence, which was of course supported by the West, that has been played up in the media and used as a weapon of war, and the white helmets are that weapon. But it's very interesting to me. I know the UK government is heavily involved in having created the white helmets, funded and continuing to fund the white helmets, but there's just been so much bad publicity about them, so many videos and photographs showing them torturing, executing Syrian soldiers, carrying weapons, picking up heads, hanging out with ISIS, and John Cantil videos, the British journalist that was kidnapped by ISIS. There's just countless waving Al-Qaeda flags. There's just been a deluge of these humiliating incidents that expose that the white helmets are linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And it seems crazy to me that the UK government has actually doubled down on their support of this group. So they must be very important. And what purpose, though, in that case, do these white helmets serve?
Well, they are very, very important because they are, in a sense, the last hope of the British government for regime change, because they could still trigger another major wave of bombing strikes on Syria. You remember in April, Duma, Britain, France, America, they launched, how many was it? Dozens of strikes on Syrian targets. And then after that, the leaders of these countries said, and if this happens again, you'll see what you'll see. It will be much heavier. Mm-hmm. Now, the really worrying thing is that apparently it was only General Mattis, the head of the US Armed Forces, who persuaded Donald Trump to scale back the bombing. The plan A for the bombing was much worse, and it involved targeted attacks on the president, on presidential palaces, on command and control headquarters. This was really scary, as even General Mattis could see. And reportedly, I believe this, Mattis persuaded Trump to scale back to option B, which was bad enough, but the really scary thing is that if there is another alleged chemical weapons attack, then Plan A will come back onto the agenda. This is what we must all try to prevent, and discrediting the white helmets is the best way for people like you and me to do it, because they were very instrumental in Duma, and before that in all the chemical attacks have been alleged attacks have involved the white helmets. They have been the catalyst. Without them, there can't be any of these fake attacks. They are the Oscar-winning actors, after all. That is their main purpose in life. This is why the head of their media department in his CV boasts that they have 150 people in their media department. 150, this is huge for a small organization. They claim to have 3,000 operatives. That is a huge proportion. This is far more than the entire UK Fire Brigade Service media people and the UK Ambulance Service media people. And they claim that they're just a handful doing media work. No, they were found out through boasting in the guy's CV.
They did win an Oscar, so they've done they worked hard for that.
They deserve it. They were given the wrong Oscar. But they're not finished. This is why it's very important to continue efforts to discredit the white helmets, which is all they deserve. And I'm pleased to say we've made quite a lot of progress, because right now, after their evacuation from southern Syria through Israel into Jordan, and the suggestion that they should come to Britain, with all that publicity, a light has been shone on their activities. And I think the British government would now find it more difficult to repeat what they did in April. That is, to say, oh, here's testimony from the wonderful white helmet, we're going to bomb. And we're not going to consult Parliament, we're not going to ask for a UN mandate, we're just going to bomb. They would find that immensely politically more difficult. But they might. So we still have to keep hammering away at this.
It's what you've said has brought up two questions for me. Firstly, Mattis convincing Trump to scale down the attack. Why was he so afraid of the consequences? What consequence would there be if the attack was greater?
I'm sure that one was that the Americans have hostages in Syria. That's how I describe the garrisons in Tanf and in places like Manbij. They are effectively hostages, because if the Syrian government is being bombed in its headquarters, they will have no reason to be restrained, and therefore attacks will be made on those US forces who are extremely vulnerable. Extremely. I mean, the Americans could easily lose 3,000 men just like that. And I'm sure that this figured very highly. He does not. The Secretary of Defense does not want to go down in history as the guy who lost 3,000 of his men for no reason at all.
It's a point I didn't consider, but that's pretty amazing. It seems almost having the soldiers there serves one purpose and is also counterproductive for them. The other question that came to mind is, why do they need a casus belli at all? This might be I know it's public opinion is important, but it seems that the public is mostly asleep anyway, and they have enough casus belli created enough chemical attacks so far. So why do they constantly need new casus bellis to, have these strikes? Why don't they just strike anyway?
It's a good question, and but I think it would have been more valid like 6 months ago. But now there is an expectation on the part of public opinion that the West will not be carried into another Middle East war unless there is something major and clear, like use of chemical weapons. There is something special in the public imagination about chemical weapons. This is not actually justified by how awful they are. Conventional weapons do far more damage. But in the popular imagination, chemical weapons are some kind of red line. I do not think that any Western government could carry public opinion, even American opinion, into war for no reason at all. So the Americans have more or less defined themselves. They painted themselves into a corner. They've said, we're not going to be involved in more wars unless there's something like a chemical weapons attack.
Which is why they need one. Because
exactly. And it's so foreseeable. There is going to be one. Let's make no mistake about it. I'm sure that a team of white helmets are working on this scenario right now. And let's not forget that they've done it before in Idlib province. They've had rehearsals. We've been here before. Khan Sheikhun is in Idlib. They could stage a repeat in Khan Sheikhun or anywhere at all. And for sure they're working on it. I thought they were going to do it in the south, but I think in the south the jihadi forces collapsed so quickly that they didn't have time.
Yes.
But in Idlib, they got plenty of time. And I'm sure that with their British handlers, they're working on it right now.
the Duma one came after they had already lost and agreed to surrender. So that was a very ill-timed one. And it was interesting that it was basically just a gas cylinder rather than a binary missile that they told us that the Syrian military possessed. Which, there's this question, again, Syria no longer possesses chemical weapons. Supposedly, the US destroyed them. So, by creating these false flag chemical attacks, they're basically saying that Syria hasn't gotten rid of its chemical weapons, which follows the same storyline of Iraq when they accused Saddam of having weapons of mass destruction, which is another word for chemical weapons. And maybe this is something that the US plans to use long term, continuously accusing Syria of still having chemical weapons, trying to put them under a Chapter 7 at the United Nations. And is this going to cause any problems, or is Syria able to mitigate this?
Chemical weapons, the Americans and the British and the French will continue to try to milk this issue. They still do. The Haley woman at the UN keeps talking about chemical weapons. The sites that they bombed back in April were empty sites. Those sites had been visited by the inspectors a few months previously and declared free of signs of chemical weapons. But our media, of course, just draw a veil over this inconvenient truth that the inspectors have been crawling over Syria for the last 5 years, never stopping, and had cleared the sites that were bombed. So we were bombing empty sites, and we knew it. And we knew it. It was a total scandal. And if any of our governments had a serious opposition party, this would be brought to light. But they don't. Neither in Washington, the Democrats. We're not going to look for any real opposition in Middle East politics there, France or the UK. So chemical weapons, the issue remains exploitable. And that is London's intention without a shred of doubt. That's why British individuals are so heavily involved supporting and directing the White Helmets. For the future, I believe that the Western countries will do all in their power to stall Syria's recovery, to prevent Syria having a good recovery. They'll do this in half a dozen ways. The strategy is fairly clear. They're aiming at partition. We touched earlier on the fate of the Kurdish-dominated areas, but I think that given time, those areas will return to the bosom of the central unitary state. The partition is not going to work, but it will be attempted, definitely. This is decentralization, etc.